Well, no good deed goes unpunished, they say. In this case, it doesn't matter if you've grown a shoestring operation of a guy with a camera and some help from his friends into a multi-million-dollar company busting open stories nobody with a much higher budget will. What really matters is you once took a sandwich from a pregnant woman and called a guy a pussy. Of course, there are more serious accusations involved, but those are real pieces of the rationale behind what is now the effective ousting of founder and face of the franchise James O'Keefe at Project Veritas. O'Keefe announcing in a recorded staff meeting on Monday that he's packing up his stuff and leaving the office because, while he technically still has a job on paper, in practice, he really has no job there anymore. That's why it's confusing figuring out exactly what word to use. Was it a firing? Was it a resignation? Project Veritas says O'Keefe is not fired and they don't want him to leave. O'Keefe says he hasn't resigned, but was effectively fired, with nearly all of his powers as CEO curtailed or suspended by the Project Veritas board. And it's not just the effect of that decision-making that's disputed, but how we got here is too. The events that led up to this non-firing, non-resignation split depend on which party you ask. We'll start with the story according to Project Veritas, piecing together the events from several Project Veritas statements and documents now. It all begins very glaringly right after Project Veritas released what might be their biggest story of all time. Pfizer executive Jordan Walker discussing how the company is in discussions about intentionally mutating the COVID virus for the purpose of creating vaccines in response, and of course, cashing in. That was January 25th. Then suddenly, by February 2nd, James O'Keefe is in a dispute with Chief Financial Officer Tom O'Hara, as well as Chief Strategic Officer Barry Hinckley, over fundraising strategy, O'Keefe says.
We've been having a conflict of visions, him and I, over fundraising. There were tactical disagreements about the boldness of approaches soliciting donations.
Unable to resolve those differences, and with CFO O'Hara apparently unwilling to follow O'Keefe's lead, O'Keefe fired him, or tried to.
I tried to deal with it privately, but I was unsuccessful, and the disagreement boiled over publicly in a staff meeting. The next day, this individual refused to resign, so I fired him.
And that is the reason the Project Veritas board says it had no choice but to force O'Keefe aside pending investigation. He fired an officer without board approval, a violation of company bylaws. And since that initial conflict in early February, the investigation into O'Keefe and the reasons for pushing him aside have expanded. Ostensibly based on that conflict with the CFO and CSO, a group of Project Veritas staff assembled a list of anonymously provided employee grievances against O'Keefe. I'm not clear if the board actually requested this report or if the claim is that it just organically came from the staff, but either way, this is where the pregnant woman sandwich theft and the Pussygate accusations come from. That was February 6th. And now on Monday, 2 weeks later, the accusations against O'Keefe have become much more serious. Money mismanagement, to put it kindly. Outright embezzlement, if you believe the worst of what Project Veritas is now saying. In their statement Monday, Project Veritas says they've uncovered a pattern of O'Keefe using company money for improper purposes, overspending on a charter flight, overspending on car transportation, overspending on events and equipment for those events, and hundreds of other uses of company money for personal benefit, the statement says, without explaining in detail what those actually are. Without specifics, that is a general accusation of theft. If I take company money and use it for personal expenses, that is stealing. That is taking money to which I am not entitled. A very serious accusation. The Veritas board says O'Keefe has not been cooperative or communicative with them during this process. They wish to speak with him, but he doesn't reciprocate. They haven't fired him, and they don't want him gone, but the Veritas board says O'Keefe is gone by his own choosing. From O'Keefe's perspective, there isn't much dispute about the sequence of events, mostly just the characterization of them. O'Keefe does say what the board does not. Isn't it weird how all of this suddenly happens right after the Pfizer video drop?
The only thing that has changed is that we broke the biggest story in our organization's history. You know that one I'm talking about? Pfizer.
But O'Keefe does add a few additional points of fact to the timeline. O'Keefe wasn't just asked to step aside for some time off as the investigation proceeded, as Veritas had previously described. O'Keefe was stripped of effectively all of his power for half a year, and he has the board meeting minutes to show it.
The CEO's ability to make these decisions suspended for 180 days with such power transferred to the executive director. The executive director reports to the board. The CEO is placed on leave for 2 weeks, and the CEO's access to donors is restricted. So I can't talk to donors, I can't raise money. On February 10th, another board meeting occurred, with the meeting's minutes reflecting that they had indefinitely suspended me from the board. By this time, they had stripped me of all of my authority as CEO. During the time I was on leave, they kicked me off the board.
This after O'Keefe says the board put him through a near 7-hour struggle session to explain and atone for his sins.
Then I was subject to a 6.5-hour listing of grievances. After the 6 hours, I was asked what I had to say for myself. I was given about 10 seconds to respond. And then I was dismissed.
Fundamentally, without complete, specific, verifiable evidence, this is a who do you believe story, at least for now. The trouble for Veritas, though, at least in my understanding of what information we do have, is that there are just too many points for skepticism in their story for me to buy it as told. It's hard to overstate the suspicion of the timing with the Pfizer story, not just for its own sake, but in combination with other events as well, because those other events seriously damage the idea that Project Veritas only became aware of these alleged O'Keefe abuses coincidentally right after that story dropped. Back in December, Project Veritas acknowledged improperly giving O'Keefe $20,000 in excess benefits to pay for employees to attend his performance as the lead role in a musical. Now, is that O'Keefe's fault? Is that Veritas's fault? Unclear, but no knowledge of accusations of money mismanagement prior is not an excuse that can be made. It's also not particularly credible to say that these accusations of money mismanagement prevent O'Keefe from fundraising now when they knew of these accusations prior, but still had O'Keefe out publicly fundraising right up until the Pfizer video drop, or at least about that time, no more than a few days later. It's also hard to overstate the significance of the evolving list of reasons for pushing O'Keefe out. First, it was fundraising strategy. Then it was improperly firing the CEO. Then it was being mean to employees. Now it's money mismanagement. It's not that any one of these is necessarily unbelievable or unjustified, certainly provided proper evidence. It's the fact that they all get piled on what looks like a desperate sequence of just stuff thrown at the wall. And the questions do not end there. Why is it that the most significant accusation, money mismanagement, came last in the sequence when that is the one that Project Veritas was aware of the whole time? And if these accusations are as serious as Veritas says they are, why isn't the law involved? If they've uncovered embezzlement, theft, fraud against Veritas donors, these aren't just bad management accusations, they're potentially criminal accusations, matters for law enforcement. But there is no police involvement so far as anyone has disclosed. But maybe it's not a matter for law enforcement because these claims are exaggerated or mischaracterized. O'Keefe provides a few examples. A Veritas officer listed a wedding venue as an improper O'Keefe expense, claiming that Veritas paid for O'Keefe's wedding, but they didn't. The venue was used for a company party.
An officer sent an email to the board with bizarre hyperbole that Project Veritas paid for James O'Keefe's down payment of his wedding. I got a chuckle out of this. I'm not married. The truth of the expense, the $12,000, was that it was a payment for our annual Project Veritas Christmas party.
Likewise, Veritas is accusing O'Keefe of overspending on charter flights without disclosing the other side of those expenses, significant revenue generated.
And taking a few charter jets over the years to pack multiple PV meetings in a day. One of those jets, I think we had a meeting in New York, Wisconsin, and California in the same day, and it raised $2 million. But the revenue part was omitted.
And there are other angles to this deception or lack of transparency, too. O'Keefe says that when the move was first made to strip him of his powers, his fellow officer said the public didn't have to know about it, even though O'Keefe was the public face of Project Veritas fundraising.
My first question on the phone to this guy, my colleague, was, quote, What are we going to tell our supporters if I'm removed from my position? My colleague, who is an officer of Project Veritas, responded by saying, our supporters wouldn't have to find out. As the CEO and chief fundraiser, I have to explain the context of my role to thousands of people.
Of course, that's just O'Keefe's side of the story, but there is other evidence to support it, at least tangentially. Throughout this process, Veritas has characterized O'Keefe's absence as just a well-deserved vacation, this posted by the company on February 15th, in combination with a statement praising themselves for their radical transparency, without disclosing that O'Keefe had actually been stripped of his entire role as CEO the week prior. As a result of what is at least perceived dishonesty, Project Veritas is losing its following rapidly. The company's Twitter account is down something like 250,000 followers after O'Keefe's announcement Monday. The company says they're making these moves to protect their financial health and sustainability, but if the Twitter loss is any proxy for support, they of course won't. Financial support won't stick with Veritas. It will follow O'Keefe. Further compromising financial health and sustainability, the public accusations of money mismanagement will invite audits, also costly if they happen. And employees are now saying they'll quit as a block if the board doesn't resign, another significant cost if it happens. Project Veritas is killing itself, but easily foreseeably so. There is no way that the board is dumb enough to believe they can oust O'Keefe in this way and not severely damage or destroy the company, which makes it very hard not to think there's some other influence at play that is potentially incentivizing the destruction of the company as it currently exists, or did a few weeks ago. If it's easy to foresee that Project Veritas donors will not pay for this move, that instead they will remove their money from the organization, well then the question then becomes, is there some other money that exists to replace it or even expand it? One other piece of evidence that O'Keefe provided is a text message from a Veritas board member to an employee saying if O'Keefe gets removed, you get a raise.
A board member reached out to one of our journalists and stated, quote, "You get a raise if there is a restructure without James O'Keefe at Project Veritas."
If you want to be generous, maybe that board member just means that O'Keefe is wrong in his fundraising strategy, so if we rework that strategy, the company gets more money, thus you, the employee, get more money. Maybe it's not some corrupt bribe, it's just a conflict of visions, but the trouble is that vision is completely contrary to O'Keefe's record. He has significantly increased Project Veritas revenues every year of his tenure, so even if you get paid with O'Keefe gone isn't a statement of shenanigans, it's a statement contrary to the financial trend. But if this Veritas skepticism is undue, if it's actually just a misleading characterization by that king of charisma James O'Keefe, Project Veritas is actually in position to show it. That near 7-hour struggle session was apparently entirely recorded. Project Veritas could release the video today if they wanted to.
Oh, and by the way, this meeting was video recorded. You may want to ask existing board members if they want to share that entire video with you to see for yourself what actually happened.
I'm not skeptical of the Veritas board because I'm some blind O'Keefe loyalist. I'm skeptical because O'Keefe has shown at least some receipts and Veritas so far generally hasn't. But I am convincible, though. I just need to actually see some of that radical transparency that the Veritas board otherwise insistently advertises. Be brave. Do something. Take whatever company motto you want. They all say, just show us the video. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below and especially over on Parler. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.